Hey bees, welcome to Guest and Gusto, SCAD's virtual series of conversations and digital content with the creators and innovators remaking culture. I'm Duke Greenhill, the chair of advertising here at SCAD, and today we're joined by design strategist and thought leader, Zhuo. Julie recently co-founded In Spirit, an advisory firm that partners with fast-scaling tech companies to build products that people love. She was previously the VP of Product Design at Facebook, where she helped scale the service from 10 million users to more than 2 billion during her 13-year tenure there. Julie's field guide to management, The Making of a Manager, became an instant Wall Street Journal bestseller and was selected as one of Amazon's best business and leadership books of 2019. She also writes about technology, design, and leadership on her popular blog, The Year of the Looking Glass. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, Duke. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in.
Believe me, it's our pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. Our students are lucky to be able to hear your story and learn from your career. Let's check in with them now, the students, before we get started. SCAD, Julie wrote an article recently offering suggestions for working from home, including tips for your work environment and how to stay active. Which of her tips are you taking to heart? Pick your answer, multiple choice, four choices. Answer now, and a chance to win Julie's book, The Making of a Manager, goes along with that entry. Also, there's a chat button at the bottom of your Zoom. You can chat us now and throughout the conversation at any point with any questions you may have for Julie. Julie, thank you again for joining us. You've had a fascinating career. You started at Facebook in 2006 and were its very first intern. You actually studied engineering in college, but at Facebook you switched gears to design. What was the transition like? And did your background in engineering allow you to bring fresh insight to the role of a designer?
Yeah, it wasn't really much of a transition. I joined as an engineer and I'd always loved doing design work. I just didn't actually know that design was a possible career choice. I'd never heard of it. I come from a very traditional, Asian immigrant family. We came here to the States when I was about 6 years old. And so my parents are like, you should really get a stable career. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And of those, I was really, really scared of blood, so that wasn't going to work. I thought legal briefs and all of that was pretty boring, wasn't really that into it, so that wasn't going to work. So that really left me with engineering. But honestly, my true passion through all of middle and high school was doing digital illustration, and it was using Photoshop, which I pirated at the time. I don't recommend it, but poor student at the time, couldn't afford anything else. And that was really how I got to learning about, using digital tools. That was how I got to actually building my own websites, because it was to showcase my artwork. So, it was a huge part of, I think, what I love to do. And any chance that I could get, I would always be just creating or drawing or illustrating. And so when I joined Facebook, I was like, okay, I'm going to go and be an engineer, because that's a way to get a job. And on my first day, when my mentor at the time, she asked me what kind of engineering I like to do, I said, well, I like to do the stuff that people see, because I like to think about, what is going to be the person's reaction or their experience, basically going through the things that I had created. And she goes, I'm going to put you right next to the designers, because that's just what designers do. And I was like, okay. So I realized then at the time that there was this design team. Now at the time, the design team was also kind of like a front-end engineering team. This was in the earlier days of the web. So we were all just writing, website code. We were writing CSS. We were writing some front-end JavaScript, some front-end PHP. So the job of the designer at that time was really to first design the thing and then to go and implement kind of how it would look. So we were both and it was great because it allowed us to then be extremely precise, right? So, we would, open Photoshop, we would put some mocks together, and then we would immediately, start to cut assets, and then we would actually implement it. And since we were, designing things that were interactive, Facebook at the time, was one of the, I think, first major websites. I think there were a couple of others like Gmail, but, it wasn't just a static site. It was a site that you can interact with, right? You can write in comments, you can, like things, you can upload photos. So there was a lot more interaction with the site. And so it was really nice to be able to actually have that ability, because something that seemed really great in static form in Photoshop didn't actually translate that well once you were talking about, an interaction with the user. So the fact that we were able to very quickly translate the concepts, into these live kind of prototypes or this live front end code was something that was really, really important. And it continues to be important, even much later, once it no longer made sense. Our code base at Facebook got so complex that it started to become harder and harder for a new designer to kind of understand how to get in there and write code. And we dropped the requirement that designers actually had to ship code. We still felt it was critical for us to be able to work in that interactive environment. And that's when we started to invest a lot more in prototyping. So, at Facebook, basically every designer, they might work in Sketch now instead of Photoshop, but they are still, it's a huge part of our process to then get into doing interactive prototypes.
Very cool. And one of the things that amazed me in sort of researching your career and trajectory was that at the ripe age of 25, you were promoted to manager. And eventually you managed hundreds of people. Tell us about the art of management. How did you grow into leadership at that young age? And what do you find most challenging and rewarding about leading?
Yeah, so I felt extremely lucky to be able to get that opportunity at that age. It was largely because I was working at a startup, Facebook. It was growing very, very rapidly. And so we were adding more and more designers to the team. And so one day my manager just turned to me and said, hey, we have 2 new people starting next week and I can't handle, having to meet with everybody. So how about it? Like, can you step up and just manage half of the team with me? And, I'm 25 years old. I don't know anything about management. I haven't been like climbing some, career ladder, right? It's been just a few years, but since we were in that kind of startup-y zone, and we were all very used to wearing different hats, because you kind of have to do what you need to do. We didn't have a lot of people at the time. So if anything needed to get done, then, you weren't really going to turn to anyone else. So, I did what I had done in so many other situations. And I just said, sure, like, of course, I'll jump in, I'll do this. I don't really know what it is, but I'll help out. And I think that was when I started to realize that, as new people started to join the team and the team became bigger and I was managing more and more, that honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I didn't really know that much about management. I got by with, starting to read books. And then, as Facebook matured, we hired in, I think, really incredible leaders like Sheryl Sandberg and, people like that were able to, I think, bring a much more robust management practice and discipline to Facebook. And I was able to benefit from a lot of that training and a lot of that, both, example in my own career. But it probably took me a few years to even, I think, get to understanding, well, what is the job of a manager? And I think I happened to be quite lucky that it suited me. And the reason it suited me is because I felt a lot of satisfaction from seeing something done and helping other people, do their best work in order to come together to achieve the goal that we had as a team. And I loved the actual coaching part of management. I love the kind of helping to bring people together and to structure processes in order to achieve the best work. And I frankly I think loved talking with people. So all of that, I think, worked out well for me, and that, it ultimately became something I loved and that I found a lot of meaning in. And I think that management is at its core just about the team. It's about working through other people, and it's about enabling others to find their groove and to be able to do their best work in order to have that group of people achieve the goals and do things that no single individual would be able to do on their own. Absolutely.
I mean, I agree with you. In my life, management has been probably the most rewarding thing that I've done as well. Another aspect that sort of permeates your career is writing. And you've written about how, for many people, the modus operandi for interacting with a manager is sort of the don't come across as an idiot. And how at a certain point in your role as a manager, your staff had trouble telling you if they disagreed, what their ideas were. What advice do you have for students about interacting with leadership and how to put forth and stick up for your ideas?
Yeah, I think the most important thing with there is to try and be aligned on what problem are we trying to solve, because I find that that's the base layer for everything. You know, if you and your manager, or you or some person who you think is super senior and maybe is a little bit intimidating, if you can understand that, hey, like the problem that that person is trying to solve, or the problem that our team or our company or our organization is collectively trying to solve is X, then you can come from that as your first principle, right? So then everything that you end up saying or doing, or the ideas that you have, if you know that it can actually advance the problem, then that's the way to kind of talk about the work. So it becomes less about maybe yourself and how you come across or all that. It becomes more about the problem at hand, which everyone participates in, and everyone is working together to solve. And I found that gave me that framing, gave me a lot a lot more confidence to be able to go up and show up in a room, and to be able to say, look, we're all in this together, we all agree this is the problem. Okay, I'm going to do my best take at trying to present something that I think will solve the problem. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. That's okay, right? Because even if it's wrong, by putting it out there, then I will be able to learn and we'll be able to actually engage in a discussion about the best way to solve the problem. One of my former managers, I think one of the best advice that he ever gave me around, like, should I speak up? Should I not? How should I present my idea is, Julie, if you think a little bit less about yourself and more about the problem at hand, then, all of this is going to be much easier and come across much more naturally. And I think he's right.
Yeah, I like that approach. Focusing on the problem sort of depersonalizes it. You mentioned learning from whatever mistakes you may make in addressing a problem. And oftentimes when we make mistakes, our managers critique us. On the opposite side of advice for students on how they might put forth ideas, what advice would you give students about how to receive critique in the workplace?
The most important thing I can tell you is that critique is good. Getting feedback is good. And the reason why is it's the best and fastest way for you to learn and grow. And especially, when I talk to, younger designers or people in the earlier stages of their career, everybody starts somewhere, right? You start and you go and enter the workplace, you don't have a lot of experience, and that's okay. I know people aren't looking to you to have that bunch of experience, because they know that you're just getting started. The quality that matters much more than what can you do or what's your skill or what's your experience at that point in time is how fast can you grow? If I invest in you and I hire you, and within a year, you're going to get to this level and then be able to, help me with some of the other problems, like that's extremely valuable. And that's the quality that I think matters most, which is the rate of growth, the rate of learning, the rate that you can actually advance your skills in the workplace. And so when you look at growth, then, okay, so then you ask the question, well, what helps someone grow faster? And I think that there's basically two components. The first is a growth mindset, right, which is going into a situation with the idea that your major goal is to learn and advance your skills as quickly as possible. Believing that that's actually what's important. And then the second most important thing is getting feedback along the way, because you might be able to learn really well, maybe from your own mistakes, but when you hear other people tell you and point things out to you, it really helps you see things that might be blind spots to you. And so I think that the ability to go out there and to actually look at feedback, even if it is, constructive, even if it's about something that, you could be doing better, and to think to yourself, that isn't a judgment on who I am as a person. This is merely, somebody going out of their way to tell me something that will help my work be better in the future, that will help me become stronger, that will help me become more valuable and more skilled in the future. I think that's the way to kind of look at feedback. And every time I've sort of, giving myself that pep talk, it makes it much easier for me, not only to receive all kinds of feedback, but frankly, to ask for it, right? To go out of my way and to say, hey, Duke, like, I just gave that presentation, like, how'd it go? What can I do better next time, right? And when you do that, people then, they feel like you are the kind of person who want to learn and grow. They'll share it with you, and you'll take that, and it will help you the next time you give that talk, the next time you show a piece of work, the next time you write an article.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much about teaching as anything. And when we teach at SCAD, we're obviously thinking about the content of the class, but we also want to make sure that we imbue the students with a curiosity. I think is sort of along the lines of what you were talking about, make sure that you're seeking to grow more. Recently in New Yorker, there was an article, and I'm switching gears a little bit here, about the dramatic imbalance in pay and power between men and women, among minorities, and in particular in the tech industry. As an Asian American woman in tech, how have you personally navigated that landscape? And then as a leader, how do you create opportunities for equity?
I think it's important to go into any sort of situation around pay, or around power, or around your ability to maybe be selected to be the lead of a project, with as much information as you can, right? So again, I always advise people, if you're going to go and take a job offer, do your research. Go and ask around, understand what the market rate is paying. It can be a little uncomfortable to kind of talk in detail about those figures, but I think it's critical, because if you're not armed with that knowledge about what you're worth, then you may not, step up and ask for what you deserve. So I think, being prepared is really important, being up to date around what the research is, what the market rates are, what kind of past historical perspectives. So that's one of the, I think, the first things is the more prepared you are, the easier it will be to have those conversations. I think the second thing, and I say this both as somebody who maybe is going into the marketplace, or facing a situation where you are a minority, as well as a leader who cares about advancing equality and diversity. I think finding support networks, as well as helping support other people's support networks, is really critical. And that means I go into, if sometimes I feel like, okay, hey, maybe there's this big role that I want, or there's this big opportunity, but I'm feeling a little nervous about it, right? I'm not sure I should raise my hand. Am I really prepared? There's so many great candidates. To be able to know that I have, 5 incredible women who like me, who trust me, who I like, who I support, to be able to call them up and say, hey guys, I'm going through this. I could use your advice. What do you think? And to hear them, give me encouragement, give me tips, give me, support, that it has helped me in so many of my, hard situations in the past, right? I think we all need to cultivate our own support network, especially if you're a minority, and especially, to be able to build that with other people who get it, who maybe have been in the same situation as you, or who are, maybe are in the exact same situation, but who are going to be advocates for you, and who have a vested interest in your success. Being able to have a couple of those people, again, you don't need like an army, you just need a couple that you, again, can trust and be open and vulnerable to. That matters a ton. And then on the flip side, as a leader, be that for somebody else, be that for a friend, for a colleague. So if you're in a more privileged position than somebody else, then it is also, I think, a responsibility of yours to make sure that you are thinking about the people who are maybe they're a little bit behind you in their career, or they're the next generation. And for me, whenever I think about hiring now, which is something that I do a lot, it's very important for me that we approach things with kind of a diverse slate approach, right? Which is to say that we always want to make sure that we have the most qualified candidate for the role, but we need to be looking at a much more diverse pool, because if we only maybe look in certain networks, we're only going to get a certain profile of candidate. And so expanding the network and telling ourselves, okay, we need to actually go and ensure that we are interviewing a diverse set of people, that we're reaching out to people who, will bring a lot more diverse opinion, diverse thinking, diverse skills to our team, because that's actually also what's going to make our team better. But to do that, and to ensure that that's part of our process, I think that's also really, really critical.
Yeah, I mean, great advice inside the office and outside. When we were researching your career, I came across a talk about making sure that we're designing for human beings, and that you're designing, when you're designing, it's important to ask which problems are the important problems to the humans for whom we're designing. What does it mean to make design human?
I think it's keeping in mind a very specific problem that a very specific person or group of people are having, right? And to make sure that whatever solution you're coming up with, success is viewed in the lens of, does it solve this problem for that group of people? And I think it's very, very hard. Sometimes people will ask me to look at a piece of design work, and they'll say like, oh, is it good? Is it not? And I find it extremely hard to answer that question without knowing, okay, wait, what's the context behind it? Like, walk me through it. Like, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? Like, who do you have in mind? And I think the fuzzier that those answers are, then the harder it is to actually have any basis of understanding, is this design good? Is it not good? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Right. So, and I worked at Facebook, where over time, our user base became really huge, right? Facebook just announced in their earnings yesterday that over 3 billion people are using per month are using one of their tools, whether it's the Facebook app or WhatsApp or Instagram, which is a staggering number. And one of the challenges for us, on the design team at Facebook, was when numbers start to become so huge, they almost become abstract, right? So then we start to use like a very, vague, like, oh, people want to do this, or people want to do that. And it starts to, as a designer, it became very difficult because we didn't actually have anybody particular in mind, and I think that that's actually worse for a lot of our work, because, when you're coming up, especially with a new feature, you kind of have to start with like, okay, when you say people, are you talking about, people who live in cities in India who have, iPhones? Are you talking about, rural people in Brazil with Android phones that are on like slower networks? Because, you would actually prioritize different features. You would prioritize like a different set of design values depending on that cohort. And sure, ultimately, we hope that each of our features can grow to have that universal appeal, and we can do that, by designing in a data-informed way. But in the initial outset, when you're coming up with a new product, a new feature, I think you have to go and actually understand who your initial target audience is.
Very cool. Thank you. After Facebook, you went and founded Inspirit. That was after 13 years, I believe. There are studies suggesting that our students will change jobs anywhere around 4 times before their mid-30s. What did you find most rewarding about the longevity of your time at Facebook? And how did you know it was time to leave?
I do actually feel that I've had, multiple careers even during my time at Facebook. And a lot of that was because the company kept changing so rapidly. When I joined, it was a startup. It was about 100 people. And, everyone knew each other. We sit in like, 2 small floors of a small office building, obviously, a very, very different vibe than when I left. And it was about 40,000 people, like large office parks in multiple cities. It's a global company, so they almost, I think, feel like it's the same company, but they almost feel like very different experiences. And so I think that part of why I ended up actually staying at Facebook for so long was because I was still getting that richness and that diversity of experiences, and constantly being put in a zone where I felt a little bit uncomfortable, which meant that I could grow and learn, and have the opportunity to try things that I'd never tried before. And so that was extremely rewarding. But I think, being able to actually see that company grow, and to remember, the dreams and the things that we hoped for when we were 100 people, and success was, so uncertain, right? To be able to see it have this kind of impact on the world and be what it is was hugely rewarding for me. I think the other part that was rewarding was that I felt like I got to grow up with the company. You know, the company grew up and I grew up, and even today, a lot of my values about, you know, what I believe about product design, what I believe about building great products, or, you know, how you approach a particular kind of problem, you know, all that was shaped by the experiences that I had at Facebook. And so, you know, I think that while, you know, Facebook will continue to grow and evolve, like I feel like in a lot of ways, it's sort of like my home. It's where I, you know, kind of found out a lot about who I was and what I was good at, and, you know, what I believe in, and how I think about things, and being able to do that with that group, with a lot of the, you know, same people, and all of us growing up together. You know, that was a really wonderful and remarkable experience. And I think the reason why after 13 years I decided to try my hand at something new was a lot of the same reasons, because, you know, I had been, I think, really like one of the number one things that was important for me when thinking about what I was doing was, well, first, the impact that I was having on people, but secondarily, was I continuing to grow, learn, and be challenged in doing things that I had never done before? And for 13 years, that answer was absolutely yes, because, you know, I started managing a team of you know, 4 designers, and then when you double, things are totally different, right? All the processes that worked when you were 4, you know, they don't work when you've got 20 people. So you kind of have to like figure out, how is that different? And then, you know, we went to like, you know, 80, and then we went to like hundreds. But I had noticed that for the last couple of years, you know, the rate of change was less and less. So managing a team of 200 people is not that different than managing a team of 400 or 500. At that point, you know, it's like I've already, I've done a lot of the work of growing, you know, wonderful leaders. And so really it's their opportunity now to kind of be able to shine and to have their ideas be heard. And so for me, it was really about, okay, so given that I didn't feel like I was, I felt like I was getting very comfortable in my role, you know, what was the next thing that I wanted to do to kind of put myself in that beginner's mindset, and to kind of challenge myself, and to, you know, get experience on problems that I hadn't before. And while Facebook works on tons and tons of, you know, amazing problems, and, you know, it's a huge company, it's also not the world, right? There's so many other amazing things that are happening outside of Facebook that I was eager to learn and to, you know, dive into. And so that is what I was hoping to do in starting this company with my friend Chandra, is go and actually, you know, work with a number of other companies who maybe in a earlier phase of their maturity, but who are trying to do amazing things. And then that way I can get exposed to lots of different problems. I can learn about new industries and verticals. I can put myself in situations I haven't been in before. And I think that'll just continue to be fun and rewarding.
I think there may be some viewers who would disagree with you that Facebook actually is the whole world. But it's a kind of a beautiful symmetrical return to the importance of growth, both personally and occupationally. Kind of along that line, our students might have to deal with issues of burnout or concerns about burnout earlier in their career, facing creative blocks, things like that. How can they care for themselves as early career designers and keep their creative process fresh?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I see this, and I think it actually impacts designers much more so, because I think we're people who got into this game because we feel very deeply. You know, I think many of us are naturally empathetic. Many of us naturally find it, you know, a little bit easier to put ourselves into the, you know, mindset of somebody else. And as a result, you know, when things get really crazy, or when the world is what it is, like, I think all of that can really, like, can be felt very deeply, and it can weigh on us. And I see that, you know, in particular with many of the designers. I feel that myself. And I think, you know, actually protecting, maybe that's not the right word, but taking care of yourself, right? And creating boundaries, you know, for yourself, and knowing, you know, what it is that you need in order to be able to stay your best, as well as to be able to do your best work. I think that is a hugely important question that we should always be asking ourselves, week after week. It's not something that, we look at maybe once a year or when things start to get really bad. It's something that I think that I found as a really important practice. And one of the exercises that a friend of mine actually had recommended that I do is keep something that's called like an energy journal, right? And I don't do this like every day forever, but oftentimes when I think that things are starting to feel a little bit overwhelming, I'll say, okay, I'm going to go and actually just journal for like the next 30 days, and every day I'll write down how is my energy today? Like what activities gave me energy? What activities sat my energy away? Like, and after a couple of weeks of doing that, you go back and you try and identify like what are the patterns? Like what am I doing that's and ending up, being these energy sucks, and what am I doing that's actually refueling me, right? And I've learned so much about myself in doing that process. I've learned over time, what is it that I need? I realized that, for me, sleep is critical. Getting a small workout in, even if it's like 10 minutes or a day, is critical. And these things have a disproportionate impact on my ability then through the rest of the day to do and to be my best. But this isn't like, I actually think that we need to be very, very proactive about how we manage our time, how we manage our energy, what kinds of situations we put ourselves in. When is it okay to say no? And I think it is okay to say no. And we all, it's something that is a skill, because I personally, I hate letting other people down, but it's been really critical, because if you say yes to everything, then you are saying no to something. You're saying no to yourself, and you're saying no to your ability to maybe do better work on the things that matter, or maybe you're saying no to opportunities you weren't even aware of yet, but that are going to be actually much better for you, right? So I think getting to the point where we, I think, understand ourselves, understand our desires, understand how we can operate our best, and then getting comfortable creating that space for ourselves. I think that I would encourage everyone to just start to do that, and don't say, oh, because I'm young, I can just like work myself to death. Like, these things, burnout happens much sooner, and it than you think, and it's very, very tough.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing about interviewing people is the segues that you have to create between the questions. And I have to tell you, you're building them in for me, and thank you. On the issue of self-care, I just got a message that we have the winner of the poll. And the winner was plan for extra exercise and sleep, self-care. You recently wrote a book. You're also a popular blogger, and you've written about the importance of finding your own voice and using writing as an avenue to finding it. Have you always been a writer? And what have you learned about yourself as a professional and as a human being from the art of writing?
Yeah, so for me, writing, I've always been a writer. I always enjoyed writing. I used to think that maybe one day I would, become a creative fiction writer, and that I would write, the next great American novel. And I've actually have a couple of manuscripts of just fiction writing. They're all terrible. I can tell you this because I tried to get my husband to read it, and he started one, and he just couldn't finish it. But nevertheless, it was. I think for me, writing has been very therapeutic. I think for other people, maybe for them, it's going on long runs, or it's meditating, or it's gardening or doing some other activity. And for me, like, a lot of what helps me feel more grounded, helps me feel more balanced, helps me feel like I can maybe start to tease apart a lot of the kind of craziness that's going on in my head, is to actually sit down and write about it. And for me, the practice of actually blogging, it all started because I was actually really struggling to speak up, right? I would be in meetings, and if it were just the two of us one-on-one, then I'd have I'd be really engaged, I'd have lots of ideas, I'd say a lot. But if we had maybe like 20 people in the room, then suddenly I could feel myself just sort of clamming up, right? That I was not comfortable speaking up, because I was worried, okay, what if I say something stupid? What are people going to think of me? I started to, I think, really edit down my ideas and the things I wanted to say. And I knew this, and it was actually something that my manager also noticed, that we talked about this, and he kept saying, you know what, like, people want to hear your ideas, like, just go out and say them. And I was like, I didn't know, I couldn't find my voice there. And so I set a goal for myself, you know, one year, it was a New Year's resolution, that maybe one way that I could kind of get over this hurdle of being more comfortable, you know, saying and sharing an opinion, even if it turned out not to be a great opinion, you know, not to be like a popular thing or whatnot, is just to like put it on the internet, is just to get comfortable hitting the publish button on the internet once a week. So that was my New Year's resolution for the year. 52 times I did it. I wrote a thing and then I hit publish. And again, the goal was not that it would be read by a lot of people. It wasn't that it was going to get a lot of likes or shares or whatever. It was just simply the act of doing. And what I learned through that year is, of course, by the end of it, it got much easier for me. You know, it was, I got to the point where I was able to practice and get kind of less maybe scared about, you know, what other people would think about my opinion. But more than that, I also discovered that it was, in fact, hugely helpful for clarifying, you know, abstract or kind of complex topics in my mind. In fact, the way that I think about writing now and what I blog about is they're kind of letters to myself. Like, if I sit down, it's like, what do I need to hear at this particular point? Like, what's the thing that I'm struggling with that I'm not sure about? And let's figure out how to write it in a way where it just becomes clear and it's like a letter I can read, you know, for myself. Because, you know, similar to teaching, as I'm sure you have a lot of experience with, you know, the more that when you are able to articulate a thing back, or when you're able to teach someone something, you yourself get better at that thing too, right? And I feel the same way as well about, you know, writing this management book, or even talking about some of the topics that I'm very passionate about, like design or leadership or management. The more that I wrote about it, the more that I talked about it, the more that these concepts also, you know, became, they went deeper inside of me. And I could see that I was becoming even a better manager in the practice of management through, you know, having spent a lot of time dwelling on these topics because I was writing about them, or that, you know, because they were top of mind for me.
Yeah, I do some writing, and I agree with you. I found the most difficult thing about it is making yourself right. Whether you feel like you have writer's block or whatever the case may be, the trick is just to keep going. You've said, in terms of management, that the main difference between a senior and a junior designer is the quality and the strength of their intuition. Can you tell a story of how you've helped a younger designer discover or own his or her intuition?
Yeah, the most important thing I think is when it comes to intuition is just observation a lot of times. You know, I think for me now, whenever, you know, I look at let's say a UI, right, a user interface, you know, I'm evaluating it, right? There's already, I've done this so many times that a lot of like what jumps out to me or what's like different or interesting or, you know, may not work is just because you know, we've had many critiques over those years. We've had many discussions at a more micro level, and each one of those helps me get to a better understanding of, you know, okay, what works, what doesn't, what are the right principles, what are the right values, and I'm sort of building that up for myself. And so whenever I, you know, talk to younger designers, you know, I always want to talk to them about the importance of that process, that, you know, don't be discouraged if like you go in there and you're not sure if, you know, your intuition is right or not. Like that's what gets developed. The thing that to focus on is the process, right? So, you know, can we go through a process where every day, you know, we look at, we talk about, or we think about, you know, our reaction to something. And, you know, like, so for example, if every time you download, you know, let's say you're a, you know, you're an app designer, right? Or you have aspirations to be an app designer. Every time you use a new app, can you like step back a little bit and actually, you know, think about, okay, what's compelling about this, you know, particular message? What's compelling about this UI? You know, they used a 5-tab menu instead of a hamburger navigation menu. Well, you know, what are the pros and cons of that? But I think the more that we also can observe and reflect on our own maybe emotions or our own, like, okay, you know, experiences going through things, that's oftentimes, you know, one of the foundations for how you can develop your intuition over time. So that's one place to start. And then the second place is, of course, critique, which I think, you know, what I love about design and what I love about, design education is like how much emphasis is placed on the idea of process and the idea that, critique and showing your work and talking about your experience and sharing that with other people, and then kind of debating, okay, why did you think that was good? Why did you not think that was good? What works for you? What doesn't? That process also helps us calibrate, kind of over time develop that intuition, that empathy for what's going to work for someone and what's not. So, I think you do that enough times and you again focus a ton on that process, even if it takes a long time, but that's over the years what ends up building to, a better intuition.
Yeah, and the tracking of your experiences, the feedback, the energy journals that you mentioned earlier, those are all data. In terms of data and intuition, how would you encourage younger designers to, borrowing your phrase, use more data better?
Yeah. A lot of times I love data because I think it's almost like another point of calibration, right? So, we go into life, we have just a lot of times our own experiences. If we talk to other people, maybe we get those experiences, but that only scales so far, because also the thing is like, we, us and maybe the people that we interact with most closely, maybe we're all quite similar because we live in a particular geographic location, or we are of, a particular, we have access to, a particular set of resources. And then that all goes out the window if you start to design for a kind of person or a group of people that are very, very different from you, right? And, we saw this at Facebook in kind of the history of our product scaling. Earlier on in those first couple of years, the reason why we were able to be successful is largely because most of us who were working there, including Mark, were all college students or recent college grads. And our product was a product for college students. And so we had very good, intuition for what would work for a college student, because we ourselves are in that demographic, right? We just had to, think, okay, what would I like? What would my friends like? And then we would come up with a feature, and we had a bunch of hits for, like lots of new features came out, and, they were successful. People liked them, people used them. And then at a certain scale, we stopped actually getting hits. We launched a number of, I would say high profile projects that ended up tanking. They just bombed. People didn't like them. They told us they hated it. They didn't use it, for various reasons. And that was when we realized part of the reason was because our user base had grown. They weren't all college students anymore. They were now, people who came from all walks of life, were from all different locations in the United States, maybe had access to different kinds of, internet connectivity or different computer power. And we realized that whatever is our experience is no longer a good proxy for, the user base at large. And that was when we had to turn our attention to designing in a more data-informed way. Because if we could, sort of measure people's activity at scale, that's the thing that, whether, especially in digital products, of course, but that's the thing where even if you have, 10 million people, 100 million people, 1 billion people, the data tells you kind of, if you're going to make this particular change, how many people like responded to it in a way that indicates that it's good for them, and how many people maybe, didn't convert in the way. And of course, data is always a proxy, right? But it's a proxy to help you understand and kind of how the world works and how people, either find this interesting, confusing, or valuable. And it has been hugely important for, I think, even our own understanding, both like, okay, what is the limits of our own intuition as because we only represent one small demographic of the world, and what can we learn from what maybe our intuition tends to be wrong about, or that we can supplement with our understanding of the larger world. And so when I think about data, I think everything just comes back to are you looking at are you able to get are you able to get a sense of like what actually happened that tells you about whether or not you solved a particular problem for that particular group of people? And then in doing so, over time, does that data help calibrate your own intuition, right? But it's not either or. I think that a lot of times, even when we think that we have actually and I continually get surprised by some experiment that goes differently than what I would have expected, having looked at like thousands of experiments in my lifetime and understanding, kind of how people react to small changes. I still regularly get surprised. And I think that is why data is often so powerful, because it helps us, discover our blind spots in our understanding of the world.
Yeah, and intuition, you use the word calibration. I think that's spot on. Requires an ever increasing degree of self-awareness, of thoughtfulness, intentionality. And in some of your writing, you mentioned that those factors, those qualities may be great differentiators for candidates in the workforce. In a recent tweet, you asked senior designers to weigh in with some advice on design, hiring. You called it matchmaking, which I thought was pretty cool. Beyond being a talented designer, what skills do you look for when you're hiring?
Oh, I look for basically what I was saying earlier about, like, okay, what I think is this person's capacity to learn, right? And so, I generally will then look at things like curiosity. Is this person really excited and interested in lots of different things? Because that indicates to me that maybe they'll go and they'll learn a lot because they're constantly asking questions. I look for proactivity. What did this person do that maybe wasn't required of them? They weren't told to do it, they weren't asked to do it, but they went and did it anyway, because again, they were looking to learn, they were looking to have an impact, they were looking to grow and to extend themselves. I look for people who are very comfortable, asking and receiving for feedback, or who feel like that it's going to be a really good, engaging dialogue if we actually get into talking about doing work together. I want someone who can give me feedback. I want someone who feels like they can take feedback really well. I also look for people who are reflective, because I think that if you have that quality of looking back on things that happened and then learning from it, again, you oftentimes will go into things with a more of a growth mindset. So one of my favorite questions to ask is like, well, let's show me a design project, maybe that you worked on, right? That it doesn't matter, maybe it's your best project or maybe it's your worst, but the question that I love to ask is like, okay, knowing everything that you know now, what would you do differently? And even if you thought that this was an amazing project, you're really proud of it, like there's generally something that, like everything has room for improvement, right? And I get sometimes concerned when people are like, no, this is perfect, there's no room to improve, because then I wonder about, their capacity to kind of continue to push themselves and grow. But if someone comes back and they've really thought about it, they have like all sorts of things for what they would do differently, and they're excited to talk about that, they're passionate in thinking about how things went, then that generally is a good sign, because it means that person is going to take that to any problem they solve, and they're going to learn and they're going to grow and they're going to advance really, really, really rapidly. And then in 3 or 5 years, there's going to be a big difference between that person and the person for whom it doesn't really do that.
They say the early impressions are those that are most important. And that's probably true in students' early careers. I had a mentor say to me, the one thing you have to do is speak up and speak often. If you could give the students one piece of advice on how to distinguish themselves early in their careers, what would you say?
I think it would be, don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to get feedback. Yeah, and I think a well-asked question, like a question, because you're confused, or because you're curious about how somebody else did it, or because you just want to extend your knowledge, they pay dividends, right? You ask questions, you're going to get a lot of great answers, but furthermore, you're signaling to other people that you're that kind of person that like cares about growth, that cares about making a difference, and people who ask a lot of questions, I think they make a great impression.
And again, symmetry of conversation. If you're not asking questions, you don't have that curiosity that you mentioned earlier is so important. In one of your pieces, you wrote, we don't get to determine all of our outcomes, but we can always choose how we respond. What advice would you give our students as they enter the marketplace, considering what's going on in the world today?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge this is a difficult time. It's a difficult time for, I'm sure, all of you. It's a difficult time for the world. It's unprecedented. I think many of us, every day wake up with questions about what does this mean? How does this impact the future? And I don't think anyone has all those answers yet. And we're just going to have to sort of collectively figure it out together. But I think that, the thing that I always go back to is like, well, first, can we don't get to control our outcomes. We don't get to, control the cards that we're dealt, but we can always, I think, find something given, the constraints. And, you and I were even talking prior to this about how oftentimes, constraints do breed creativity. They give us, room to think about a problem or think about an opportunity in a new light. It doesn't mean it's going to be great or maybe as amazing as what the alternative, but there is always something that I think we can take from a set of constraints and then figure out what is the best path forward, given that, the constraints are what they are. And I think that for me, in particular, in this situation, I think a lot of it is just actually taking this time to like reflect on like, okay, well, what really matters to me? What are my values? Going back to, what are the things that give me energy? What are the things that don't give me energy? I think the more that we understand ourselves and what matters, the easier it is for us to start to then find, maybe the points that are sparks of interest and be able to sort of, bring them together into something that maybe works as a career, or it works as like a lifestyle, or it works as something that can be a habit of ours. And so I think in this particular point, I think the advice that I'd have for all of you is like, okay, since we're all here and we're all like at home and we maybe have less of the activities that we would normally be rushing to every day, can we take this opportunity to better understand ourselves and what we want out of life? Can we use this as an opportunity to understand our values and how we want to live each day? I read this amazing book that I highly recommend called Conscious Business by a guy named Fred Kaufman. And he had this wonderful concept that he called success beyond success. And, and the concept is very similar to like, because I think he's the person who said, like, we don't get to control the outcomes, but we can always show up and make decisions that are in adherence to our values, right? So, maybe you go in and you really want to win that big deal, whatever, if you're negotiating a big deal with a client, you really want to win it. Maybe, you can't control who the competitors are. You can't control who, that person is talking to, who's also bidding, against you for that deal. But you can say, look, my values are that I'm going to be extremely transparent and honest. My values are that, this is the kind of work that I want to deliver, and you can present and make your decisions and your actions in adherence with that every day. And maybe you will win the deal, maybe you won't. But no matter what, you will go to bed at night knowing that you made those decisions on your own terms in a way that is meaningful and satisfactory to you. And that really resonated with me. But I think the hard part is actually all of us taking that time to understand, well, what are our values? How do we want to do things, right? And it's very difficult to actually answer those questions when you're kind of always in the rush of day to day. And it's also honestly tough to answer those questions, even, if you've had like an hour or 3 days. It's the kind of thing that you kind of have to ruminate on and spend time on. And sometimes you have to actually try a thing and then realize that's not actually how you want to do things in order to know, the way you really do want to do things. But I think that actually the more that we can, take that time, this time that we have to reflect and understand more about ourselves, the easier it is will be for us to be able to then make decisions in a way that aligns with how we want to live our lives.
Speaking of making decisions and living your life, what's next for you at InSpirit? And as sort of follow up to that, where do you think that design can have the biggest positive impact in the world?
I think that, where can't design have impact? I think that we are in a still an early part of, design where every company that I talk to is now recognizing how critically important it is. This wasn't the case in tech in Silicon Valley. 20 years ago, it was all about, if you're going to start a company, the important thing to have is like a bunch of engineers, right? Because they need to go and code it. And, of course, engineering is still critical. But now every single company I talk to tells me that, okay, in addition to having great engineers in their starting team, they also need a great designer or a great set of designers. And they also understand that their company needs to actually have strong design values and a strong design culture from the get-go. And I think that you're starting to see that because people recognize how important it is to business and how important it is to the world, that, you know, we are always keeping in mind, what is the customer perspective? What is the user perspective, right? It's not just like, okay, let's build something because we have fancy technology and it's going to win. It's like, we also have to care about how it's going to show up for people, how it's going to make them feel, like what kind of problem it's going to, you know, be able to solve. And so that's a lot of what I think designers, again, do so well. That's like a lot of like what is the core of our profession, is putting ourselves into the shoes and the mindsets of thinking about other people. And that needs, that, you know, that change is happening everywhere and in pretty much every industry, right? You know, I think about, for example, even in medicine, you know, or I think about, you know, the projects and when we talk about like climate change. And I think that these are, you know, hugely important and critical problems that we're all going to need to wrap our heads around as a society. And I think that the more that we can, you know, come into these problems, again, always with a lens on people, always with a lens on understanding, you know, what matters, augmenting that, of course, with, you know, with data and with, you know, a lot of our ability now that, you know, we have the tools to be able to get larger amounts of data, but always with that kind of mindset. And I think that that kind of collaboration, that kind of, you know, back and forth, the kind of critique that we're all so used to in our profession, I think that is extremely, extremely needed. And so I can't think of any place where I don't think design can have an impact. And I think that we're only just going to see more and more of, you know, people talking about how critical it is.
Well, it may be biased and it may even be selfish, but I agree with you. We're going to move on to some student questions. These came in while we were chatting. Hi, Julie. My name is Maria Ruiz, and I'm going to be interning with Facebook this summer. As you know, the internship program is going to be completely remote this year. What advice or recommendations do you have for succeeding and standing out at Facebook as a remote worker?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And I hope you have a great internship experience. I think it's not that different than what I would recommend if, you know, even if it weren't remote, which is, you know, like go out there, like be proactive, you know, don't just do the things that people tell you to do, go out and actually go beyond. See if you can really understand the problem. See if you can go and actually dive one level deeper into, okay, so I'm being asked to do this task. Why? Why is this task important? Okay, so because we need to do this particular, why is that important? You know, and just sort of understand that all the way down, because the more that you do that, the more that you have questions, you know, you ask those questions, the more that you have the understanding, the better the work is that it's going to be, and the more that you'll actually be able to hopefully, you know, come up with a creative perspective or a better solution that is, you know, beyond what the obvious solution is. So, you know, ask questions, try and actually, you know, understand the depth of what matters, and in doing so, you know, I hope that you'll be able to have fun and you know, produce some really great work.
I agree with you there. The parents of a 3-year-old may disagree, but why has got to be the most important of the questions. From another student, I keep reading your articles. I'm really grateful that you are here sharing your experience. I love reading books, and I'm really curious to know, what 3 books do you suggest for us to read?
Great. I love giving book recommendations. So my favorite books that have the biggest impact on me personally, the first is Mindset by Carol Dweck. This is where she talks about growth and fixed mindset. She has tons and tons of examples. She has tons of actual research around childhood development of, you know, just how important those outcomes are, you know, when you approach problems with a growth mindset. So that's my first one. I'd mentioned Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman earlier. I love that one because it's a business book that also marries a lot of like personal values and like thinking about ethics. And I think in particular, you know, design ethics is a huge topic right now. And I think it's a really important one for us to have. And this is looking at things from a very like personal lens. It's like, how can you understand your own values, or what are those values that might guide the way that you work in a business setting? So Conscious Business is a really great one. And then one that I read recently that Duke and I were also talking about prior to this chat is Why We Sleep. And this is a book that really sums up, many decades of sleep research on, the critical importance. And I found it fascinating just because, it's like evolutionarily, like, yeah, why do we need to sleep? Like it takes up, a third of our day. It's super, like, why is that the case? But also all of the studies that link, sleep to better health outcomes, to better focus, concentration, your ability to do well on a test. And actually, for our sake, like creativity, right? REM sleep is really, really well linked to our ability to actually like bring disparate concepts together, which is the core of creativity. And this really had a significant impact on, I was like, after I read it, I was like, all right, I really need to do a better job of prioritizing sleep.
Cool. Okay, I got an urgent one in just now. What's printing behind you? That's what everyone wants to know. What's printing behind you?
Yeah, it is a pyramid, and my husband put this on because we just got chickens, and our chickens are living in this little bin, and they have a little heating plate because you have to keep them warm. Otherwise they don't do so well. And so we found that our chickens keep hopping on top of the plate instead of going under where it's warmer. And so my husband's like, I'm going to print a giant pyramid to put on top of the plate so they can't climb on the plate. So that's what's happening.
Chickens. I think that's all we have time for, Julie. I can't thank you enough for your insight, which in my humble opinion was golden, both in terms of occupational insight and advice in the office and just how to make your way as a human being in the world. So thank you again, Julie. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks to all of you who joined us as well. Stay tuned for more guests and gusto each week throughout the quarter. Join us next week for conversations with Flesh Beauty's Linda Wells, Google's Mike Buzzard, and the design duo Formo Fantasma with Design Miami's Eric Chin. We'll see you next time on Guests and Gusto. Thank you.
Thank you.